Winnipeg developer that owns the Lemay Forest in the city says that it's ready to start cutting down trees. Lemay Forest is located in the heart of a controversial real estate project in the middle of St. Norbert. So the forest defenders believe that there are unmarked graves of Indigenous children on the land. Earlier this year, they filed a private lawsuit against Tochal Development Group, who owns the land. Now, Thursday, the group learned that the lawsuit will not be moved forward by Manitoba Justice. John Wintrip represents the development group. He spoke to CBC's Catherine Moreau about what's next.
Yeah, we're going to be cutting down trees, and more than a few trees. It's not going to all happen at one time. I've said all along, going to be a slow process of trees coming down at different times. It's privately owned property, and the landowner wants to make productive use of his lands, and that doesn't involve keeping trees on the property for the neighbors.
There's been this implication that there are children buried in the forest. So how are you taking that into account?
We self-identified this more than 2 years ago and reported it to all levels of government, as well as organizations and right holders, that we believe there's a voluminous number of deceased individuals, children, babies. Our research indicates we believe up to 5,000. We are going to be out there this spring and summer to precisely locate any deceased remains. We were out there in 2020. We dug several test pits to see if we can find anything. Those results came back negative. So we're going to be doing more further research. Our goal is this spring and summer to look for the precise location of the cemetery and the former remains, and also to acknowledge the past with some sort of culturally appropriate ceremony.
So that was John Wintrip, a representative for Tochal Development Group. Now, you heard him say the group wants to start cutting trees as soon as possible. They haven't started yet. Defenders of the forest and community members, though, are concerned. Environmental advocate Eric Rader is up early. He's with us this morning. He was just in Lemay Forest over the weekend, and he joins us via Zoom. Good morning.
Good morning. Thanks for having me on.
So what's your greatest concern right now, especially having heard, where the developer's at in that clip?
Yeah, the thing that we were really trying to do is keep the forest standing. This is an extraordinary place in the city, and it's an extraordinarily old forest that has values far beyond just the trees that are here. So we're trying to keep the trees standing as a decision about what should happen with this forest, this memorial site occurs with the public.
What's your thinking around the graves that may be there, and the fact that the developers, they said they are taking somewhat care to try and address, if their remains are found, and they say they've been looking for the last number of years. What's your response to that?
Yeah, that doesn't align up with what's required to care for this area. The Manitoba Historical Society has produced a report. It hasn't quite been released in the public. I think it's coming out this week, but it's not a question of whether or not there are graves. It's not a supposed. There is documentation of more than 3,000 children and unwed mothers who had passed away in the La Cille Richot orphanage in this area. So we know that those graves are on this site. The documentation that's coming forward, the research that's been done over the last few months shows that folks who ended up here came from Indigenous residential schools, and the sheer volume of people who are here and who are buried in the forest. And the documentation talks about mass grave sites. This could be the largest unmarked grave site in the country, and should be something that gives everybody in the city and in the province pause, and in the country, frankly. This is something that we really need to account for.
This is also private land. So I'm curious, from that standpoint, should this, in your view, be private land, or because at the end of the day, no government stepped in to expropriate this land. So I'm wondering what your thoughts are about that.
Yeah, the city is looking at expropriating it right now. The land is only private land because of mistakes made in the past by governments. They have the opportunity to change that. The land was sold not being designated as a cemetery. While there were thousands of bodies buried in this place, when the land was sold, they said, well, we moved 15 of the bodies of the staff members who worked here, so the cemetery isn't active anymore. So that's the city and the province have the opportunity and responsibility to properly designate this land as a cemetery, and that would change the way that this forest is cared for. And at any point, the province can step in and recognize that this is Indigenous sacred land. There's been ceremony happening on this property for more than 20 years. The province can step in at any point and say, yes, because of the historical significance, because of the unmarked graves, because of the fact that this site needs to be memorialized, we can designate it a heritage site.
What's the mood? Because obviously this weekend it would have been a setback for the group like yours that's fighting to have this preserved, Lemay Forest. As we mentioned, the case. I'm just going to get the language absolutely correct, so I'm just going to look at our news story here. I apologize. Last week, a Manitoba Crown told the protesters, a group that you're involved with, that the protesters' lawyer, so it was lawyer to lawyer communicating, that all charges will be stayed. That hasn't yet happened, but the lawyer has communicated that will happen. So how are you feeling about that? The fact that this isn't going to work its way through the stand-up in court in a different way?
Well, it indicates that if they don't think that the cemetery should be respected, it shows that the governments have made mistakes. Right now, something we were talking about this weekend is that it's breeding bird season in Manitoba, and that forest has to remain standing because in Canada, we protect our forests while migratory birds have come in to utilize the forest. So we're concerned that the developer will go in without adhering to federal migratory bird laws, which is what happened in December. And he took trees down in December when he hadn't been adhering to the Migratory Birds Convention Act. So that's our concern right now. But in reality, we know that as more people learn about how valuable this forest is, why this area is unlike any other place in the province, in the city, why this forest should be set aside. So the consultation with Indigenous leadership, with governments, as far as we're aware, hasn't occurred properly. That's a government-to-government relationship between Indigenous communities and the governments. It doesn't involve a private landowner. Just like looking for graves isn't something that a private landowner should be doing, as we're looking at finding out the truth and reconciliation of what's happened through residential schools in this site. That's not something that we put into the hands of a private landowner. It was a mistake was made by previous governments to allow this to happen, this to be put into private lands, but we know that there's a process for that landowner to bring this back into public care so that we memorialize this forest.
What's next in your fight to try to save Lemay then? Where do you go from here?
I'm pretty certain that the governments are going to hear from more and more community members as they recognize what this really means. The Historical Society's report, I believe, will be released this week, and we'll have a news conference and folks can ask questions about this and understand really what's needed in this forest to memorialize it, but also the steps that the different governments haven't taken, the mistakes they've made, and the steps that the federal, provincial, and City of Winnipeg need to do right now to preserve this. And that will give people clarity of how we finish this, and then the governments will step up and show the leadership that's needed. Because in January, when this really came to a head, when trees were coming down and the ceremonial fire was lit in December, late December, you could expect that the governments didn't know enough about this situation, but 3 months on, we know what is here. We know why this area is important, why it's sacred land. Now the governments need to step up and lead.
We'll leave it there, Eric Rader. Thank you very much for opening the show this morning and updating us on the developments that happened through the weekend. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
You can go online later this morning and read more about this at cbc.ca/Manitoba. As you heard, Radio Canada's Catherine Monroe was on site. We have Eric Rader, who's just been with us, nature and water conservationist with the Wilderness Committee.